Hello, my name is Graham Elwood. You are watching the Political Vigilante. We are joined by a very special guest, a journalist and activist who is currently in Damascus, Syria, Vanessa Beeley. Vanessa, thank you so much for, I know it's an odd where you're at, but I appreciate you getting up basically in the middle of the night or just staying up all night. I don't know how you're doing it, but to be on the show.
No, thank you so much for inviting me on.
So I just, for some of our audience who might not know who you are, I want to share your Wikipedia page because it's yeah, exactly. I knew you'd find it funny. It shows how they're smearing you. So yeah. You've basically, and we'll get into I want you to explain all of it yourself, but like, you've uncovered a lot of false narratives about the white helmets. And for doing so, you then get this put on your Wikipedia page. Vanessa is a British activist and blogger. She is known for her pro-Bashar al-Assad advocacy and promoting conspiracy theories and falsehoods about the Syrian civil war, in particular the white helmets, who are, she falsely claims, are a terrorist organization. All right. I mean, nothing gets that quicker than when you call out the war machine. Oh man, do they come at you. So why don't you tell everybody, like, give us what you have uncovered over the years with the white helmets that has now brought about the ire of the American empire and its allies.
Well, basically, I mean, I actually wasn't the first one to highlight the role of the white helmets inside Syria. I put out a big shout out to Corey Morningstar, the wrong kind of green, who does an incredible job exposing the NGO smart power complex. And I would recommend everybody go and take a look at her work. But actually, I started to gradually look into what is effectively, in my opinion, a UK-US intelligence construct, which was created in 2013, incubated in Turkey and Jordan, not inside Syria, I hasten to add. And then basically, it's a group that was embedded exclusively in the terrorist-occupied areas inside Syria. By terrorists, I mean Al-Qaeda dominated groups. In Aleppo, for example, they were being filmed with ISIS, with Daesh, which of course is the big pretext for the US in particular to have a military footprint inside Syria is its war against ISIS. They are embedded with these armed extremist groups. As I say, in most areas that are occupied by these militant groups, they're dominated by Al-Qaeda, which is the most heavily funded, heavily armed group, of course, funded and armed directly and indirectly by the US coalition, by members of the US coalition that have been waging this regime change war against Syria for 10 years now. That, of course, is verified by the released Department of Intelligence Agency documents showing that America in particular was planning to foment the insurgency inside Syria using these extremist proxies to carry out their bidding, which of course is the toppling of the internationally recognized Syrian government. So the white helmets are...
I just want to clarify for my, we've talked about it before in the show, but just, yeah, it's a thing we pointed out, but to my audience here, Vanessa has just very concisely pointed out the United States is funding Al-Qaeda to help overturn Assad in Syria. That's I thought we were part of the war on terror. Well, sort of. When someone won't give up a oil pipeline, then things get a little murky, I guess. So yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to clarify.
Well, I think also it's very important to note that the US is also working alongside ISIS. I mean, as I said, you know, the very organization that provides the pretext for the US to increase its military footprint. I mean, Trump, of course, made noises about withdrawing from Syria. But in reality, under the COVID-19 crisis, in fact, America has been increasing its military footprint in Syria, particularly in the areas where it's occupying, or its proxies are occupying, the oil-rich resources, the oil wells, etc. Of course, how the US sees it is organizations like ISIS, like the SDF, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish separatist factions, who are effectively a proxy of both Israel and the US in Syria. These organizations are using the oil as revenue. So they're basically stealing it, they're taking it into Turkey in particular, and which is from there it's being sold on to Israel in reality. So the US is effectively using Syrian oil to provide revenue for its proxies. So they don't have to pay ISIS and the SDF to do what they're doing, because they're taking millions, if not billions, in oil revenue. So this is an important factor in this entire narrative, of course. You know, that the US is there in Syria to effectively wage this war against ISIS. The Al-Tanif base in the southeast of Syria is right next door to, people may have heard of the Rukban refugee camp, because the US uses that as a sort of humanitarian narrative, misleading narrative. The Rukban camp is a refugee camp, but it's a refugee camp which is dominant, which is controlled and occupied by extremist groups, which include ISIS. Arms are being funneled into that camp through Jordan. Every SIM card in that camp is American, by the way. So the US military in Al-Tanif can keep track basically on what's happening inside the camp. It's a recruitment center for these extremist groups. America has a 25-kilometer radius around the camp where Syria and Russia, which by the way is an invited ally of Syria, are not able to enter. So this entire, the Tanif military base and the Rukban recruitment center is effectively ring-fenced by America and controlled and guarded by American armed group proxies.
Yeah, and it's like, it's another reason why the Democrats will never go against Trump for his failed campaign promises of like, he's going to pull us out, and he even talked about it like last year, he's going to get out of Syria. The Democrats will never go after him for this, because they're like, well, no, that's actually, we're okay with him keeping all of this military and stuff in there, because both parties in this country are all for war.
I mean, it's, well, and Kerry, I mean, if we go back to September 2016, Kerry participated in a closed session in the UN, during which he spoke with the leader of the White Helmets, Raid Saleh. And during that meeting, he effectively, I can't quote him absolutely, correctly, but he basically said they expected ISIS to get strong enough to overthrow the Syrian government. So clearly this is not a statement from a foreign secretary who wants to see the defeat of ISIS. This is from a foreign secretary who basically was hoping that ISIS would storm Damascus, overthrow the government, and enable the US to impose, of course, a regime that would be compliant to US-Israeli policy in the region.
Which is all, if I'm not mistaken, all the US wants to take this pipeline through Syria into Western Europe, whereas Syria and...
Well, I mean, effectively, of course, one of the reasons why this entire war started was that President Assad, quite rightly, in my opinion, refused the Qatari-Turkish proposal for a pipeline, which of course was backed and promoted by the US and the US coalition, so the UK I would include. The UK, in my opinion, is the brains behind this operation. They are the intelligence behind this operation, as the latest leak of UK Foreign Office documents has revealed. They came out released by Anonymous, same Anonymous that released all the documents about the Integrity Initiative, which was last year. A few weeks ago, they released these leaked UK Foreign Office documents, which show the extent to which British intelligence has been promoting the armed groups, providing media coverage for the armed groups, providing protection for the armed groups through whitewashing them, through various NGOs and organizations that they're funding in order to misrepresent the conflict in Syria and to obviously influence public consensus in order to manufacture consent for further military adventurism in yet another global arena where, of course, they are attempting to destabilize, to foment insurgency. I mean, back in 2009, Roland Dumas, the then French Foreign Secretary, in 2013, he told interviewers that the UK had approached him in 2009 and had told him that this is basically what they were planning to do. Right, so this is not the conflict in Syria is not something that organically erupted out of what many people will term a civil war. No, I mean this was being planned way back. If you go back to the communications between Bush and Blair in 2003, Blair was very clearly saying, let's try to develop a different relationship with Syria. Let's try and avoid what we had to do in Iraq. Let's try and avoid intervention. Let's try and basically court President Assad, which is what they did. But of course, President Assad didn't come in line. He didn't relinquish the Palestinian cause. He didn't demand that Hezbollah quit Syrian territory. He refused to break his long-standing defense treaty, basically, with Iran. Of course, he has had the Russian naval base in Tartus for the last 50 plus years, right? And then, of course, he refused the Turkey-Qatar pipeline in favor of the Iranian-Russian pipeline. So all of this was, of course, complete anathema, to the UK-US alliance that had perceived Assad as a potential puppet government that they could manipulate in order to have control of resources and regional territory.
Oh, of course. And had Assad said yes, then we'd all love Assad. Then America would say how great he is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a good challenge to anyone. Try and find any media that is attacking President Assad prior to 2011. You won't find it. What you will actually find is Tony Blair, for example, nominating him for a knighthood, for an honorary knighthood in 2002. What you will find is American academics such as Professor David Lash writing glowing praise of him in a book that came out just prior to 2011 and then flipping completely post 2011. So, I mean, this is textbook regime change, intervention war that we've been saying in Syria. It's not a civil war. It's not an organic insurgency. Of course, there is opposition to the government. Of course, I speak to them regularly, and I'm allowed to speak to them, by the way. But they are what I would call the authentic opposition, and they don't take up arms and kill their own people in order to achieve democratic reform. They do it through the proper processes. They do it through parliament. They do it through constitutional measures. And yeah, Syria is an operating state. It hasn't fallen. It hasn't fallen apart through the war. I mean, I would challenge any Western government, any Western state to undergo the 10 years of hell that Syria has undergone. And that includes what I call economic terrorism, the imposition of savage sanctions by the US, UK, which of course, don't affect the state as such, the government. They affect the people. The poorest people in the country are being affected right now. Just to let you know, I have electricity at the moment, but in about an hour and a half, it will go off. I have 9 hours electricity a day. We don't have fuel at the moment. Why? Because the US is occupying all fuel resources, or a couple of other refineries. So we don't have fuel. There are 10-kilometer queues in Damascus for fuel for cars. We don't have gas. Food prices are rocketing. I mean, this is just to give some indication to your audience of how people suffer under economic sanctions. And so, you know, I would challenge any Western state to have basically held the country together in the way that the Syrian government has done. And, you know, this isn't about one man. Of course, the PR and the whole military industrial complex love to create these kind of bad guy, good guy narratives that are totally reductionist, but very easy for people to digest, right? So Assad is the bad guy, gassing his own people, killing his own people, bombing his own country, bombing his own infrastructure, hospitals, schools, etc. Right? I mean, why are they rebuilding them if they bomb them in the? I mean, the whole thing is just insane, especially when you're here, you know, and you see how the government is effectively. It's still providing bread to the people. It's still providing salaries. It's still providing civil society aid and sustenance for people. You know, it's extraordinary the stability that this government has maintained through this war. Whatever you think of them internally, whatever Syrians think of them, I challenge you to go out on the streets of any city in Syria now, particularly those that have been liberated, and speak to people here and say to them, and even if they say to you, yeah, I don't like this government, but don't, like, let's not like, we can't afford to be unstable right now. You know, we need the stability of this government.
So and of course, everything you just said is no, I cannot get any information on that from any American media. It is just impossible. He's a butcher. He's a bad guy. He's this and that. That's all we hear. And so what you're telling is just I'm not sure. And on the one hand, it's shocking, but it's not, because this is what the American government does. I mean, they're doing this similarly to Maduro in Venezuela, because again, Venezuela won't give up their oil. So, Juan Guaido, this CIA puppet just appears out of nowhere, and he's the new leader, and Pelosi and Trump stand and clap for him. It's
well, and I mean, and also they've done it previously in Libya and Iraq. Iraq famously, of course, on the back of the dodgy dossier of the weapons of mass destruction. And let's not forget that there is a current dodgy dossier on the Assad chemical weapon attacks. You know, the OPCW has been proven to be corrupt and producing fraudulent reports to retrospectively justify the US, UK, and French unlawful aggression against Syria after this alleged chemical attack. And again, you know, I was in Damascus when this attack happened. And in fact, the day before, I had visited chemical weapon laboratories that were under control of the armed groups, including Jaish al-Islam, which were the governing armed group in Douma, where the chemical weapon attack allegedly took place. Now, I visited those factories, basically producing chemical weapons, producing chlorine bombs and grenades and so on, with CNN's Frederick Pleitgen, right? Because, you know, here media get taken together to various sites, particularly if it's just after liberation, for our own safety. We're taken as a group, which always cracks me up, because when they accuse me of, like, well, yeah, but you go on government organized tours. Well, hold on, CNN and BBC and ITV and all the other media were with me. How come you're not saying the same thing to them, right? So anyway, I went into all these manufacturing sites and weapon dumps and ammunition stores and missile production centers, run by the armed groups and, of course, supplied by the US, the UK, the Gulf states, Israel, Turkey, etc., with Frederick Pleitgen. Now, the really interesting thing, one day after this is when this alleged attack took place. And, of course, the first thing that came into my mind is, well, hold on, the so-called rebels had chemical weapon manufacturing sites there. So surely this should be mentioned. I saw Frederick go live, right? Not one word. Okay, it looks like the Syrian government has yet again gassed their own people. So I went at him on Twitter. Of course, he blocked me immediately everywhere. I was like, hold on. Just yesterday, you were with me in an area right next to the area where this attack has allegedly taken place, right? We even saw cylinders that were exactly the same as the cylinder that was photographed famously having come through the roof and landed on the bed, and the bed didn't collapse and the ornaments didn't fall off the wall, right? And so now, of course, fast forward, of course, at the time, because I was saying this was a fake, this was a staged event, I spoke with civilians in the area, I entered the hospital, all this kind of stuff. And I said, no, come on, this was staged. Nothing happened here. It was not a chemical attack. And this is what I was being told by medical staff, by civilians. I mean, civilians were back out on the streets, setting up little markets, right? If this had been a sarin attack, they'd be dead, right? So this is the insanity of these narratives. And of course, then everyone started calling me a conspiracy theorist and, you're just a pro-sadist and all this kind of stuff. Fast forward, of course, and now the OPCW experts and analysts have come forward and said, this report doesn't actually represent what we said. We basically said there was no chemical attack. I mean, I'm very much sort of reducing it down, but people can go and read about their statements and their testimony at the Courage Foundation. Grey Zone have been reporting on it. Jose Bustani was supposed to speak at the UN Security Council about a week ago. America and the UK and I think Germany and a number of other countries actually prevented his speaking. So the Russia's presidency of the UN Security Council this month, he had to revert to his national capacity to read out the statement from Bustani, which basically was saying that why is the OPCW not giving airing to the analysts and experts that are questioning and challenging the report, which is effectively saying there was a chemical attack, right? So, I mean, it's and of course, the fact that the OPCW is proven to be corrupted, compromised. It is funded by the majority of the states that are attempting regime change inside Syria, of course. It also then has to cast serious doubts on previous alleged chemical attacks that were justified or were corroborated by OPCW information. And of course, we come back to the White Helmets, because the White Helmets are the group who, alongside Jaish al-Islam in Douma, produced the images that went viral immediately across all mainstream media, and that are now proved, even by a BBC producer, by the way. Riyam Dalati actually tweeted out that the bodies were rearranged, that this was a staged event, right? So this is a BBC producer that is putting this information out. Of course, he went dark very, very soon after this. He disappeared from Twitter. I think he's back on now. But, the BBC is doubling down on that propaganda. I mean, this is extraordinary. Unlike the weapons of mass destruction, what we're seeing in Syria is the exposure of the entirety of this propaganda campaign against the Syrian government and the Syrian people being exposed real time. It's literally being exposed as it's happening.
And yeah, the propaganda machine is so powerful. But more and more people are starting to wake up and come to follow you and shows like mine and stuff like that. But so when you first started covering this, were you working for the BBC, or how did you first start?
No,
never.
No, God, no. I've never, ever worked for a single kind of mainstream outfit. No, I mean, like many of us, really, I guess my I started off as more an activist. I mean, I had a sort of background in Middle East politics through my father, who was a British ambassador and a long time advisor to various governments on Middle East affairs, and who was pro-Palestine for the majority of his career and lectured on the conflict, or rather the occupation of Palestine, even after he retired. So I kind of grew up in that environment. But it wasn't until 2012 that I went to Gaza, Palestine, for the first time. And of course, that's where I met a dear friend and colleague, Eva Bartlett, who is also under attack by the BBC at the moment. And we were both there in November 2012 when Israel started bombing. And basically, you know, my development, if you like, into being a journalist rather than just an activist came from there. And then I started to see what was happening in Syria, and I entered Syria probably, for the first time in July 2016. I had tried previously, but it's quite difficult to get visas, and particularly at the height of the conflict in 2014-15, it was quite difficult to come in. But in 2016, I came in with a US peace delegation, and I actually met with President Assad with the peace delegation. Of course, this is also kind of used against me, and
Sure.
the Times, in fact, published 4 articles on one Sunday attacking myself and the academic working group on Syria, media and propaganda. And of course, they took the photo of me standing next to the president, but I had about 10 members of the US peace delegation standing with us, but they cropped down the photo to just be me and President Assad. None of the members of the peace delegation, you know, I mean, heaven forbid a delegation goes to a war-torn country to actually foster peace. I mean, this appears to be, you know, a crime according to Western media.
Well, it's a similar tactic. I mean, when Tulsi Gabbard went there,
yeah, exactly,
on the Foreign Relations Committee, and she's like, I'm not in favor of regime change wars. All of a sudden, you know, she loves
Russia.
God and Russia and bombing and whatever else. She's like, no, I'm a veteran. I saw friends of mine die in a regime change war in Iraq. I don't want to see this happen again here. They use it's the same playbook. One of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is, like, I applaud you for doing this work, and you're in Syria and you're being targeted. And obviously what's happening with Julian Assange is pretty alarming to anyone of any journalist. And I'm amazed that, I mean, these corporate journalists should be screaming from the mountaintops about this, but they don't care because they're just mouthpieces for these, you know, oligarchs or whatever. And, you know, it was, I learned about Serena Shim, who uncovered
Terrible.
you know, and she uncovered, I believe,
she uncovered Turkey. Turkey and Western NGOs were smuggling weapons and terrorists into Syria via the Turkish borders, basically. And she was, we suspect,
American bases, correct? She was,
she was working on the Turkish-Syrian border. I think she was in Kobani, which is the renamed area occupied by the Kurds. I think, from memory, sorry, it was in 2014. But definitely she was exposing the fact that weapons and militants were being smuggled across the border from Turkey. And of course, inside Turkey, you have Gaziantep, which is effectively the intelligence center for the US and the UK in Turkey. It's also known as the Jihadi Express because it's where all the ISIS recruits from Europe and further afield come before they enter Syria.
So, yeah, I mean, I remember learning that she uncovered that, and obviously had this very sort of mysterious car accident that nobody wants to investigate what they're doing to Julian.
And she's an American citizen. Yeah. She's an American citizen, but America has never looked into her death.
Ever, not once. They don't even mention her name. I didn't. I had to find out about her through Susie Dawson, like, because it's you don't just know who she is. So my question is, like, all the ways that they're targeting you and smearing you because you're uncovering the truth about Syria. I mean, are you worried, Livy? I mean, obviously, I guess you might, I mean, Damascus might be the safest place for you. I don't know. But
I was going to say, I mean, I'm probably in the safest place, joking apart. Yeah, I mean, I think what was so shocking about the recent attack from the BBC, and you know, it's not only myself they've attacked Eva Bartlett, they've attacked Peter Ford, a former UK ambassador to Syria. They've attacked members of the working group, which are mostly academics or scientists, doctors, etc., who form the group. And who have been working on the various propaganda narratives against Syria or exposing them. So it's a blanket attack on anyone who, as you say, has been exposing, in particular, the White Helmets, and in particular, the former British military intelligence officer, James Le Mesurier, who founded the White Helmets and who died in very mysterious circumstances in November 2019. But what is shocking for me is that in my case, the BBC actually issued effectively a legal threat. So they have become the full extension of state power by doing that, because I honestly, historically, can't think of a precedent where a media outfit has threatened legal action.
What legal action are they threatening?
Well, what they've basically said, I can't remember the exact wording, but what they basically said, they've spoken to a lawyer, and on the basis that I have said publicly, and I will stand by that statement, that the White Helmets are embedded with terrorist groups. The White Helmets provide military intelligence to Al-Qaeda. They provide information on incoming airstrikes by Syria and Russia to Al-Qaeda, right? This is proven through a US State Department-backed surveillance system, HALA systems. They carry arms. There are accusations against them from Syrian people that lived under their occupation of child abduction, of organ trafficking, of torture, of imprisonment, persecution of religious minorities or those that don't comply with Islamist extremism. So I have said publicly that under those circumstances, and if they are occupying hospitals and schools and civilian residential buildings alongside Al-Qaeda, they cease to be a humanitarian organization and they are a legitimate target during a military campaign to liberate urban areas from a terrorist military foreign-funded occupation, right? So the BBC has come back to me and said, well, on the basis that you are in contact with Syrian ministers, that you are supported by Syria and Russia, and that you are effectively inciting the bombing of a humanitarian organization, you might be liable to prosecution under humanitarian law. Right? This, well, the BBC, of course, historically has supported US, UK military intervention and the humanitarian devastation that has been caused by these wars globally, supported by the BBC. So, you know, this is an extraordinary power grab by the BBC, in my opinion. And this is what alerted kind of me and Whitney, because we're like, shit, you know, on the back of what they've done to Assange, you know, unlawful incarceration, effectively torture, mistreatment, etc., etc., and you know, a kangaroo court trying him, and a travesty of a case against him. What it's done clearly is embolden, particularly state media, to effectively persecute independent journalists or dissidents or activists or academics who don't toe the line, because they're challenging narratives that organizations like the BBC are paid to produce. So it's a dangerous precedent. It's a very dangerous precedent.
Yeah, it's mystifying to me that a media organization would threaten legal action. Like, if that's not state media, I don't know what is. I mean, it's just like it's so. What do you? I mean, like, what do you do in this situation? This like.
Well, actually, we attack. I mean, you know, Shamin Nawani, another journalist who I highly recommend people read. I mean, she was in Syria right from the beginning of the conflict. She exposed very early on many of the false flags and the propaganda stories that were being produced by various people embedded on the ground here in Syria. But she said to me, look, you know, they're not going to take you to court, because as soon as you go to court, because the BBC is state media, your legal team will have access to all the documents that the state has on the conflict in Syria. So she said, of course, they're not going to do it, because they're going to have to release information that is going to really, you know, put them in the dock, basically. Mm-hmm. And I believe she's right, because I've always said, you know, by all means, take me to court, because if you take me to court, I can call witnesses. I can bring forward my evidence in an independent, supposedly independent environment, right? Rather than a sort of, you know, a prejudged trial by the BBC. So, you know, my response and Whitney's response, is, if you like, was immediately to say, okay, let's use this. Let's turn it against them, because it's overreach on their part. You know, that I don't believe that under any sort of legal status should the BBC be issuing, albeit sort of, you know, carefully worded legal threats. I mean, this is psychological war at best. At worst, it is serious intimidation.
Right. Right. Well, man, I applaud you for doing this, and I'm glad Whitney reached out to me to have you on the show, because you know, some of this information I knew about I've done some videos on the OPCW and the leaked documents and showing that they're corruption. I've talked to Tarek Haddad on the show about what he uncovered, and but I mean, the fact that you're there on the ground, and I mean, how is Damascus, just in terms of, I mean, you told us about the gas lines and the electricity, but in terms of just like on a day-to-day living basis of safety, is there, I mean, do you feel like
it's totally, I mean, no. If you came here, you'd kind of say, what war? You know, people go about their business, and they have done since the final liberation of the eastern suburbs of Damascus in March, April 2018, of course, just as the Douma chemical attack happened, or the alleged attack. Since then, basically, all the checkpoints pretty much have been removed. There used to be a lot more military checkpoints, of course, because there was always a threat of suicide bombers coming into the city itself and self-detonating, which did happen while I was here in 2017. They entered the courthouse and detonated and killed a huge number of people. And of course, none of these attacks are really talked about in the West, right? None of the mortar attacks, the tens of thousands of mortars that landed in schools, hospitals, Christian areas of Damascus, they were rarely talked about, you know? And when I used to come, both myself and Eva, we used to stay in the Christian area, Bab Touma, in the Old City, which is very close to the areas that were occupied by the terrorist groups. And we regularly used to, you know, get out of the taxi, and the next minute a mortar would fall in Bab Touma Square. This was common occurrence, right? But it was never mentioned, the number of children that lost limbs, arms, legs in these attacks. I was there when they attacked, just as kids were leaving school. and a huge number of kids were killed. One girl lost her legs in that attack. You know, and these attacks were never ever spoken about. But now, if you come to Damascus, I mean, if you go to the old city now, it's almost like you're in Paris or London. I mean, you know, the bars are all open. People are dancing until 3 a.m. You can see the effect of economic sanctions, as I say, because you can see the queues for fuel, etc. But as far as movement, safety, security, no, it's complete. And I also have to say that even coming here during and being on some or close to some of the front lines on a number of occasions, I never felt insecure, because actually the Syrian army, and this is what sickens me about the narratives in the West from the media, is those media that do come here and they are given a visa and they are given escort, and yes, they are given protection and security because it's a war zone, right? Me personally, I'm really happy the Syrian army is with me.
Right.
Because there's a strong chance you're going to get targeted. There's a strong chance you're going to get kidnapped. There's a strong chance, you know, there's a number of things that can happen to you. You can stray off into territory which is actually occupied by terrorists, right? Because the proximity, I mean, at one point when I was visiting towns in northern Hama, for example, from a local restaurant, you could see the Nusra Front checkpoints. They were only 200 meters away from me. And the actual Nusra Front encampment was only 500 meters away from me. You could literally see them. If you look through binoculars, you could see Nusra Front moving around. So in my opinion, the Syrian army, and I've seen them put themselves between a journalist and snipers, or between a journalist and incoming fire, right? And the absolute criminal hypocrisy of these media who come and whose lives are protected and saved by the Syrian army, and yet will go away and write about what criminals they are, how they kill their own people, how they rape their own women. East Aleppo, perfect example. During liberation, the UN and Western media was basically saying, oh, the Syrian army is entering these areas and it's raping the women and it's, you know, and I'm standing in the streets where they're claiming this is happening. And I'm seeing the Syrian army break down in tears because they've gone home for the first time in 5 years. And I've seen them carrying old ladies from the top floor with all their baggage and helping them onto the trucks that were taking them out and providing them with hot tea. This makes me, you know, I don't care what people say about, my bias is towards these guys. Why? Because they are conscripts. This isn't some kind of professional army like the mercenaries that the US has sent to massacre Syrian people. These are conscripts, right? Most of them are not professional soldiers. Most of them are just fighting to defend their country, their people, their families, their way of life, their culture, their secular coexistence, which of course the US would see destroyed, right? And an extremist regime put in place because that makes it easier to control. So the army is of the people are of the army. There is not one family in Syria that you can visit that hasn't lost a relative in this war. Not one.
Yeah, that's like, yeah, the American media, that is, it is criminal that they're all the stuff that's happening. And I don't think, and the thing is, the American people, because they're so blatantly lied to and they don't know where to get any sort of truth from, don't realize that Americans are backing terrorist organizations that are shooting rockets into Christian neighborhoods. And, you know, like all that stuff you just explained, most Americans go, well, wait a minute, I thought we were fighting terrorism. You know, like, no, we've spent trillions of dollars that all could be spent here in America. And here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and we give trillions of dollars to Wall Street, and we keep these wars going and these sanctions. And it's just criminal. Like, and most Americans have we don't have any idea. We just, oh, it's a Muslim country, they're terrorists. And we don't understand the like you say, the secular divisions and how they were working together. In many of these countries, they've been working together, and the American State Department comes in and makes sure that keeps everybody divided. But it's the same thing they're doing here in America. They're keeping us divided so that we don't rise up and get them out of power. Like that's what's going on. Well, Vanessa, tell people where, like, what they can follow, how they can get more information, help your cause, support in whatever way. How can people do that?
Well, I have a Patreon account for as long as we're allowed to keep them. Of course, the deplatforming campaign is probably going to gather momentum, as we all know, against dissidents and activists and independent journalists. But I have a Patreon account, and yeah, even $1 a month is a help, you know. I write for obviously Whitney Webb's new website, Unlimited Hangout, The Last American Vagabond, Ryan Christian, who does an amazing job, Mint Press News, RT, of course. So that's it, yeah. And Twitter and Facebook, but Twitter mostly.
Okay, cool. Well, we'll look for you on all those platforms, Vanessa, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day or the middle of the night, your early morning, to talk with us. And I really applaud the work that you're doing. So stay safe.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And by all means, if you uncover some new stuff that you need to get out, you email me whenever they're like, hey, Graham, I want to put this out there. That's what Whitney does. Whitney just reaches out to me and goes, Graham,
cool.
do thing. And say, all right, you come on. So you got my email, reach out whenever you need to talk about something. We'll have you back on the show for sure. That's
brilliant. Thanks ever so much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vanessa. Have a great day or morning or sleep or whatever.
I will.
All right. Stay safe.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye. So that was Vanessa Beeley, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, that's, again, she's out there. She's in Damascus. I mean, it was like whatever, 2 a.m. for her. So it's another, this is the thing, the corporate media is just, I mean, like I've been pretty knowledgeable about the lies of Syria, but we just all learned more in this last, whatever 50 some minutes I was talking to her. And she's in Damascus, man. So if you can, join her Patreon or something, that'd be huge. And she's on Hidden Hangout, which is now Whitney Webb's site that is now on Rockfin. It's another way to support Rockfin. And so you're supporting all of us on Rockfin. But yeah, that was that's just amazing. And there's the blatant lies of corporate media, Yeah, I don't even know what the title of this clip is going to be, because it's just like there's so much information in there. But thank you, everybody, for supporting the show. Like, share, subscribe. And of course, I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Graham Elwood, rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, a blockchain cryptocurrency platform. The reason I've been talking about it for a year is because the deplatforming is starting. I've been kicked off of Twitter right now. I don't know if I'm going to go back on. YouTube has been throttling me. We're stuck at 73,000 subscribers again. We're at one of these sticking points. They're unsubscribing people. My goal is to get to 100,000 by the end of the year. I really want to achieve that, but I don't know. But the good news is we're over 10,000 followers on Rockfin. So, Unlimited Hangout. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, this woman is putting her life on the line. She's putting her life on the line. That's what this woman is doing. And she's well aware of, and she's putting her life on the line. So, that's a badass. That's a vigilante, baby. That's a political vigilante right there. So she's out there making Gotham great again, like on a street level. So, yeah. And I'm going to just keep trying to bring people like that on this show and expose what's going on the best that I can. So yeah, support everything that I'm doing. I have a Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum wallets. They're all in the show notes on the clips. And Coinbase. I have a Coinbase affiliate code. If you sign up for Coinbase and buy $100 of crypto, you get $10 of Bitcoin. I get $10 of Bitcoin. I think crypto is the future. Again, here's why I bring up crypto and what Vanessa just talked about. She's talking about the economic sanctions and how people in Damascus, and we've talked about this, sanctions are an act of warfare, right? So that there's lines for gas in Syria and all this. What if everybody over there started getting on cryptocurrency. We just send them some crypto, and then like it changes things. It also shows why we got to get off of oil. Like, look at all the evil that's caused because of oil. Just everybody became self-sustaining. We wouldn't have any of this bullshit. So anyway, yeah. So thank you so much for supporting the show. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. I got a Venmo. I got a PayPal. Thank you for supporting independent journalism. Boom. Shave your knuckles for justice.